Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Writers Chat. We're so glad you're here with us today. I am Johnny Alexander, joined by my co-hosts Melissa Stroh and Brandy Bro. And today we're welcoming a very special guest, Jean Matthew Hall. Jean has been since 2001 a school teacher, an administrator, Sunday school teacher for both children and women, the director of Write2Ignite, a writing coach for homeschooled students, and the owner and editor of StarLight Magazine. She has one published picture book, God's Blessings of Fall. Jean and I have crossed paths a few times at the Mid-South Christian Writers Conference, and she was there in March to teach a class on writing for children. And today she's going to be talking about prosody, a word we don't see very often or hear pronounced very often. We were talking about that before we got on the recording. Prosody, the music of language, which I just think is so wonderful, just to give us that extra something special to our writing to, impress publishers and agents and editors. So, Jean, we're going to turn it over to you. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen immediately because I don't want to run out of time.
Okay, good plan.
So come on, you share.
There we go.
Slideshow. Come on, thing. Do your thing, slideshow. Okay, it's supposed to show it, right?
Yes.
I love technology.
Go up to slide. Oh, go over to from the beginning to your left and start there, I think.
Hold on. Let's go back. No, I don't want to leave the meeting.
Mm-mm.
All right, let's try this again. One more time. I go back. Where is it? From the beginning.
Yeah, it's to your left or to my left, like maybe to your right.
There
Yeah.
we go.
There we go.
All right. Well, good morning to everybody, or evening, or whatever time you're sipping tea and watching this. Today, I'm going to talk about the beauty of language. And, I like to call it the musicality of language. But when you think about music, we all have different tastes. And some of us love quiet, soothing music. Like me, I play it most of the day. And some of us love lively, happy, jazzy music. And some of us love some very serious, painful music, very sad music. And we usually we want to listen to different types of music for different occasions or at different times in our lives. So we find that prosody helps us to set the same stage that different types of music sets. The point, one definition I read was that prosody is the music or the cadence, the movement of language. Another writer said it is sound emerging from meaning. And that is one of the purposes of using the different items that we're going to talk about, is we pull them from the meaning to enhance the meaning. I like this definition: the blending of linguistic and literary elements to create mood, voice, and tone of a literary work, to carry the theme also. Just like when you listen to music on the radio, you like the words, whatever song you're listening to. But if someone just read those words aloud as a poem, listening to it once would probably be enough. But the music carries the words, and that is the purpose of prosody. So when we're trying to achieve this beautiful use of language, or this creative use of language, we want to make just right strings of words. We put them together by looking at the different elements, which include sounds. Those are linguistic elements, pauses, Yes, that's part of the cadence and part of the movement of language, rhythms, punctuation, and word choices. And the point is to have the story flow, much as a river carries branches, twigs, us when we're on a floating thing, much as the river carries us along, selecting the right elements for what we are writing helps to create the flow, the mood, and the voice that will support the theme. And you'll probably hear me say that again. Sorry about that. And there's a long list of elements that we include. And I would like to preempt this with one thing. I like to write picture books. I write picture book manuscripts. And a lot of these things, all of these things apply to picture books. But as you write up the ladder, when you begin writing for chapter books, middle grade, YA, you will find that some of these are important parts or elements in what you write. The first few probably are not. You might occasionally use rhythm, rhyme, internal rhyme, assonance, consonants, and alliteration to make a specific point in a middle grade book. But you will often use the other things that we're going to talk about. And when we finish here, my email address is at the end of the presentation, and if you'll send me an email, I'll send you the definitions of these words. So I'm going to try to be really quick because at the end of my presentation, I'd like to show you some examples. And most of them come from picture books because that's what my bookshelf is loaded with. Okay, come back, you. Rhythm, I think we all know what rhythm is when we talk about music. But when you read a work aloud, whether it's a picture book or a novel, have you ever read a novel that you just fell in love with the words? That just the flow of them was so perfect for that story, to carry that meaning or to embed that theme in your head. And that comes from the rhythm of words. And the most basic elements of the rhythm is stressed syllables, unstressed syllables, and pauses. And when we put them together the right way, they create a cadence. Rhythm goes with rhyme. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I love to write in rhyme. I love to read in rhyme. And they try to write in rhyme and it just never comes out right. I've found with people that when I critique a work, most of the problem is not that they can't rhyme, it's that they don't have the rhythm correct. Because both have to be perfect if you want the work to sing. And that's a whole nother workshop for those of you who want to be poets. Internal rhyme means, we're all familiar with rhyme. At the end of each line, the word has the same ending and middle sounding, the same vowel and ending consonant sounds. But internal rhyme means that it can be the words inside the lines that rhyme with each other. And you have to use this judiciously. If you do it too much, it's like putting 4 teaspoons of salt on your potato. It can get sickly if you use it too much. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within the word, inside the words. Let me find an example real quick. This is my little book, and I know it has these in it, so I'll grab it. Let's see. Piles of leaves, red, gold, and orange, huddle around the roots of trees, then take to the sky. The rusty, dusty smell of musty leaves floats over fences and fields. Achoo. And I think you can see that would soon get tiring if you did it in every single page. But assonance is that internal vowels. Consonance is the repetition of consonant sounds within the same line or sentence within the same small area. They have to be close to each other. And alliteration is similar to assonance, but it is the repetition of the vowel sound that is the first sound of the word. So words have to begin with vowels in order for you to have alliteration. Onomatopoeia, I bet everybody knows that one, don't you? You learned that in like, what, 4th grade? And it was such a cool word. You learned to say it, and I learned to spell it, because I just thought it was such a cool word. Onomatopoeia is words that sound like their meaning. They reproduce a certain sound, like a chew. That word reproduces what a sneeze sounds like. Hyperbole can be used in many different ways in picture books and in all the way up the ladder into YA. Hyperbole means exaggeration. And this is elemental. This is very important to any great book for children, even adults. You have to make people bigger than they really are, or smaller, or meaner than they really are, or nicer, or sweeter, or sneakier. You have to hyperbolize it, make it bigger and badder and better than they would be in real life. And you can do this with words, characters, scenes, even themes. You can make a theme that is monstrously too big, but it takes a real skill to pull that one off. Repetitions, well, everybody knows what that is. You say the same word over and over again. Not quite. I mean, you can, but it can be the same phrase repeated throughout, or the same word, or the same sentence, or the same refrain repeated throughout. But how you use the repetition and where you place those repeated lines is key. For instance, if I want to create a sense of urgency that something's about to happen, I would repeat one word 3 times in a row, like, listen, listen, listen. And it creates a feeling of urgency that the story is moving on and going to leave me behind if I don't turn the page. But repetitions can also be make the story familiar to us, especially with young children. Repeating a refrain at the end of each page or the end of each scene is very comforting, and it helps young children go, oh yeah, I know this story. I know this story, because they recognize that repetition. But it can be equally effective in middle grade chapter books and so forth, to have something very familiar that is repeated throughout the book. Word order. Oh, this is a good one for people who want to write in rhyme. Word order is critical to setting the pace of the story. You have to, normally you would put the most important words in a sentence at the very beginning or the very end, depending on what mood or what tone you're trying to create in that story. This is a rule of writing in rhyme also. And I've seen this many times, people who write a manuscript and the last word of each couplet or each quatrain rhymes perfectly, but they do it the way people did it 150 years ago. My love, a rose thou art. We don't talk like that anymore. And especially for children, we need to use word order that is natural, which is, you are a rose, my love. It doesn't sound nearly so fantastic. So we have to work with all of these other elements, pull them all together. You notice I have puzzle pieces on these slides because this is a game. This is a puzzle. And we need to use all of the elements and stick them in and pull them out and swap them over here and put them in this sentence and move this sentence to this page or this paragraph to this chapter. It's constantly fitting things in until they work best, until we come up with that just right sentence that goes in this spot. And then we begin working again on a just right sentence for the next spot. Sentence length is very important in setting pace, particularly, and for setting mood. Short, choppy sentences mean this story's on the move. we got to get to the end of this, or someone's chasing us, or we're chasing someone. But long, smooth sentences create a much more relaxed story. If you're telling a story about a little girl who is at the park and she sits beside a little stream in the clover and she's picking little daisies that she has found, or dandelions, and the breeze blows and the clouds float overhead, you're going to want longer sentences, remembering the age of the child. But you're going to want longer sentences. And I'm going to throw this in here also. Picture books are written to be read aloud. They are not written to be read by a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old. They're written, we write them so that an adult or an older child can read them to the young pre-reader or new reader. So we don't have to stick with a word list for picture books necessarily, but sentence length plays a very important part in the mood that you're setting for your story. All right. Well, that one unusual. That last one, which I can't see it, says unusual or distinctive words. Clever words, words that you wouldn't normally see in a children's book. Sticking them in, like whiz bang. I love that word, but how often do you see it? Many years ago, it was popular, but sticking in unusual words, maybe even a word that's much too difficult for a first grader to understand. Here's an opportunity for the parent or adult to explain to them what this means. The list continues. Colorful verbs and specific nouns. I can't see you raise your hands, but how many of you raise your hands if you've heard use verbs and nouns? Stay away from adjectives and adverbs. And that is true. That is true. If you use strong, colorful verbs, you don't need adverbs. A boring verb is walk, go, enter, sit. But a verb that doesn't need any adverbs would be she raced, or she plopped into the chair, or the wind tore through the window sash. Verbs that do not need anything to dress them up. They're perfect the way they are. And you may have to pull out your thesaurus to find them. Very specific nouns. Telling a story about a little girl, like I started a while ago, who's at a park and sits by the stream. Those are not specific. A story is more likely to touch a child's heart if this little girl has a name. If Isabella is wandering through Branch Park, where grandfather used to take her, and she sits down to watch and give the stream a name, to watch Bully Stream tumble by, you're putting the child's imagination, you're giving it some specificities to fit. 10 different children will have 10 different pictures if I use generic words, bland words. But when I give them a few things, a few cues to help them hone in to the specific scene I'm trying to create, and those specific words help them a lot. Silence. Oh, go back, Jean. I'm so good at doing this, you all. Aren't you proud of me? Silence and pauses are extremely important in creating mood and pace. Have you ever opened a picture book and seen in the middle of the book and you see one word on the page? Might even be a totally blank page. One word. That's a very important word. It's going to set the tempo of the story. It's going to set the mood. It's going to tell us something about the character in that story. All that white space, we see it as silence. And that's how we represent it. If you're typing your manuscript for a picture book, or even for books for older people, older children. When it's time to take a big breath, skip a couple of lines. Put the word or 2 or 3 words you want, skip a couple of more lines. Your editor can see that you have taken a big breath before and after that very important sentence. Conjunctions, you know what those are, don't you? And, or, nor, for, when, because, after, all those words. And you can again set the pace and the mood. Is this story exciting? Or is this story sweet? If I use conjunctions, a lot of conjunctions, it's going to slow down the reading of the story and make it feel more relaxed. Remember, we are using all of these elements to create a mood and to carry a theme. So if I'm writing a book about There's No Need to Fear the Dark, there might be pages in there where the mood needs to be tense. If that's the case, I would avoid using conjunctions. She stood. She looked around. She reached for the doorknob. I'm using pauses, like periods, but I'm speeding up the tension or speeding up the pace or both of them. Whereas if I use a sentence like, Alice stood up and she looked all around and then she reached for the doorknob. It's not just the tone of my voice that is different. I probably still sound like a frog, whichever way I'm saying that. But the absence or presence of conjunctions, even in a YA, you're setting a level of tension or urgency or a lack of tension or urgency by your judicious use of conjunctions. Articles are the same way. If I fill my sentences with thes and ands and us, they're grammatically correct, I'm sure. But sometimes we break the rules of grammar for effect, for mood. So we can do the same thing with those articles. George walks into a room. He looks around. A book, a vase, a single rose. There's no ands in there. But if George is a junior detective and he walks into a room, he sees book, vase, rose, blood. Then it sets a different mood. Punctuation is part of that also. Conjunctions, articles, punctuation, white space, all go towards setting the pace. It is not just the rate at which the reader reads the words. It is the rate at which the story flows. Is this a raging river that's carrying my story? Or is this a lazy stream? I used to love to read Gary Paulson's books because they made me hold my breath the entire time I was reading them. Those are middle grade books. But from page 1 until the very end, I was trying to keep up with all the action that was happening in the story. And he used many of these effects or many of these elements. The last one I'm going to talk about is juxtaposition. I love that word too. I know I'm a word nerd. That's okay. And I'm looking for just the right book. My favorite book that shows us juxtaposition is a picture book called Beautiful. If you haven't seen it, go to your library and borrow one. And the entire book is juxtaposition of these sweet words like, I'll just pick a page. And you can't see the pictures on the page, but they create total juxtaposition. Beautiful girls move gracefully. However, when you look at the pictures, there's a girl playing football. There are two girls in wheelchairs playing basketball. Here's a girl trying to make it to first base, and another girl is straining to catch the ball, and two girls practically fighting over a soccer ball. And the entire book is like that. Sweet words, very strong and active illustrations. Now, I have given you a whole long list, haven't I? Look at all these things that are at your disposal. I've never analyzed one, but I don't think I know of any book that uses all of them. That book might make me tired to read it if I use all of that stuff, but I think we use them more than we are aware of. It's becoming aware that these elements, literary elements, like these and others that you're familiar with, like, no, I just lost the word. Okay, I'll come back to that when my brain opens up again. But these, the literary elements are words that help carry the story, but the sounds that words make do the same thing. For picture book writers, we tend to use more of the sounds. And as we write for chapter books, middle grade, YA, and even adults, we tend to use more of the literary sound, the literary elements like these. I would like to give you 2 or 3 little tips about the way I make this work. To me, all of this is a one big puzzle. And I have a library full of puzzle pieces that I need to fit into every sentence, every page, every paragraph, every whatever. And so, do any of you do jigsaw puzzles? I don't. I get frustrated with jigsaw puzzles, but I love Sudoku. And Sudoku is a puzzle also. In its nature, it's similar to jigsaw puzzles. The first thing I do to get this puzzle put together in the right order is write the story or the content if I'm writing nonfiction. All of these devices can be used in nonfiction too. Many of the new books that have come out, the nonfiction picture books that have come out in the last 2 or 3 years, and even chapter books, there are many new chapter books, use these devices to grab the reader's attention, to carry the story or the information into the child's heart and mind. So first thing I do is write the story completely without worrying about any kind of devices. I write the story, not the words, and then let it sit a few days, and then go back and start my detective work of looking for places that I can make better, places where I can use stronger verbs, more specific nouns, where I can hack out a few adjectives or adverbs. In a picture book, I look for places that I can remove words or replace words with words that have a better sound, a sound that goes with the mood of the story I'm trying to tell. I do that after I've read through this story maybe half a dozen times. The second bullet point is so important, especially to those of you who desire to write in rhyme. The story or the content comes first. It is primo. All of the elements, the wonderful sound that your book makes when you read it out loud, all those devices serve the story. The sweetest sounding book in the world, if it doesn't carry any kind of message or if it doesn't tell me a great story, is what literary agents and editors used to call slight. I don't know what they call it now because things keep changing, but they used to call it SLight. It sounds good. It has great devices, but there's no story there. There's no story that really tells me anything. Tip number 2 for what I do, read the manuscript. Read. And even if I find, oh, I can replace this word with that, I may want to come back to it later. And yeah, I might go through that manuscript 100 times, at least, before I'm satisfied that this is the best word, the best device, the best place to put a pause in order to get that emotional response that I want from the reader. And the same is true in books for older students. When a student finishes a middle grade book, I want them to have an emotional response, not just to the characters, but to the story and to the theme of that story. Emotion is, this is my opinion. I'm sure somebody else has said it, but emotion is much more powerful than intellect. We can have the most brilliant information in the world in a book, but if that book carries no emotional key into that student's life or heart or experiences or desires, they'll read the book, put it away. We need an emotional response. And that's why we do play all these games with the different literary elements. My third tip, you cannot rush this. I have friends who love jigsaw puzzles, and every fall they have this huge board that someone built for them with borders around it. They put it on their fancy dining room table and start a puzzle, you know, one with like 5,000 pieces. I don't even want to think about that. And they work on it all the way through the winter, all the way through the season, you know, and their goal is to finish it by spring. And they love it because they're not rushing it. When they walk by, they might stop and look. Oh, that piece might go there. I'll try it. If it doesn't work, I'll lay it aside, or maybe it goes there. And they repeat this process again and again. Excuse me, 1 second. Trying to lubricate my throat. Each time this is very important to remember. Each time I change a word or a punctuation mark or whatever, I will need to change other words, or I will need to change word order, or I will need to change where I put a pause. Every change I make precipitates at least one more change. Anybody here do Sudoku? That's the fun part of Sudoku to me. You get all the way down the page, you know, after hours and hours and hours, and everything fits except that last 1 or 2 numbers. Oh, and you have to look north and south and east and west, and then look at that 9 square, and then you realize that back on the second line, I'm going to have to change these 2 numbers. Okay, I've done that. And then that means I've got to change 2 more numbers and 2 more numbers until finally that last number fits in that slot completely. It's very satisfying to know that I've done it. Aha! I've won this time. And writing with prosody, I don't even want to say beautiful language, language that is appropriate, language that carries the story. I like the image of a stream flowing or raging, carrying my words along. That is the point of going to all this trouble, spending hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, weeks, maybe months, trying to put exactly the right word into exactly the right sentence onto exactly the right page. But it's worth it to me. But do remember that you're going to do this over and over again. Sometimes I put a manuscript away for a month or 2 and work on something else. then come back and look at this with fresh eyes. This process is like working a puzzle. I think I've told you that. And surely you like one of these kinds of puzzles. I never fell in love with Rubik's Cube. My sons could do it, you know, with their hands behind their back, blindfold on and all that stuff. I never got interested in Rubik's Cube. But I am interested in creating works that speak to children's hearts and feed their minds. I'm going to have to try many different steps, move pieces around in multiple places. And this puzzle of writing a book for children, whether they're 19 years old or 9 years old, this puzzle isn't going to be solved until I have achieved that level of language, that feeling of language, that music that carries the story along. And that won't happen until I'm satisfied with the very last piece. And then what kills you is along the way, you think you've got it right, and you take it to your critique group and they go, huh? This sentence doesn't make sense. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I mean that sincerely, because now I know that I need to go back and work some more. I thought I had that sentence perfect. Well, I guess I didn't. Back to the drawing board, back to the puzzle board. One of my goals when I'm writing a book for children is to make each word, each white space, each punctuation mark earn its place in my manuscript. And that's not just talking about word count. Yeah, I know, 500 words or less. But each one of those 500 words for a picture book has to earn its place. If I'm writing a 500-page YA, if I want the readers to fall in love, not just with the characters, but with the story, I have to do the same thing. My goal, my secondary goal, or excuse me, my second goal is to create the mood, the voice, the tone, and the emotional reaction that I want the reader to, or the listener to experience. If I've done my job well and driven myself half crazy doing it again and again and again, the listener or the reader will never realize that I've done all that work. You know what they'll think? Oh, I could write that. It's kind of a backhanded compliment, isn't it? If we make it look so simple that every reader thinks, oh, I could write that. They do not know that we did all this manipulation so that the reader or listener would see what I intended for them to see, feel what I intended for them to feel, learn or remember what I intended for them to remember. You don't need very many tools. You may have these on your laptop, or you may, like me, I have them on my laptop, but I also have them on a bookshelf that you can see behind me. A dictionary, and I like to also have a children's dictionary, like an elementary school dictionary, a rhyming dictionary, a thesaurus, an emotional thesaurus, and you can Google that or go to Amazon or wherever. And I think there are 3 of them out now, but they're wonderful if you are looking for the perfect word to get the perfect reaction. And the Children's Writer's Word Book, which gives you reading level, age level. It gives you some synonyms and antonyms also of words that you can use that are appropriate for children's books. And yeah, you might have to spend $25 on each one. I don't know. Again, you have access to all of this on your laptop if you have internet. And you can do it too. It takes patience. You can't say, oh, there's a deadline in 2 months. I'm going to write the story and get it off to the editor in 2 months. That might not happen. Not if you want it to be the best story you can read, best story you can possibly produce. So now, are there any questions, or do I have time to read a few examples or show a few books that are examples?
You have time to show some examples.
Okay.
We had a couple comments on books, and of course all the puzzles and doing Sudoku and Rubik's Cube. But Deborah talks about My Little Train, and the author is Satomi Ichikawa. I hope I pronounced that right. As an example of a picture book with a lot of onomatopoeia, less frequent rhyme, interesting uses of repetition and punctuation. Seems like saw another one earlier on that somebody suggested to see if I can find it. If anyone else finds it.
I'm writing these down.
Oh, Melissa talked about Bodie Tane's book In My Father's House, having of course, that's a novel, having fantastic lines that carry rhythm and rhyme. So
When you start looking for them, you'll find them in a lot of places. You'll find lots of books. Like this book is called Firefly Mountain. It's a very relaxing story of memory of childhood.
mhm.
The whole long yellow afternoon, the sun boiled down so hot, the heat squiggled up in waves from the meadow. The dry, sweet smell of clover hay floated over to where the oaks dropped fat brown shadows. What a moody
Mm.
page or paragraph. Here is the beautiful book. Has very few, I think only about 120 books, but the pictures, the illustrations are so cute. Like this page says, beautiful girls light up every room. Can you see that?
Oh, cute.
It's just a great example of juxtaposition. Little Fox in the Snow is another of my favorite books. Uses a lot of white space and short sentences for effect. Let's see. Hunger draws you like a bow. You must seek your target. You must hunt. What's that? Your head tilts, your ears swivel. Tiny footsteps beneath the snow. And then on this page, you see all this white space and very few words. You pounce. As sure as an arrow, you pierce the surface. And on the next page, of course, he catches the mouse.
Mm.
But that's just a snack, he said. This is a nonfiction book about Melville Dewey. And he was a very analytical person and not a real popular person. Very demanding of people who worked with him. And several places in this book give us that sense about him. Night and day, Melville dreams about ways to organize libraries. He dreams about numbers and decimals. He's in love with decimals and libraries. One Sunday during chapel at Amherst, Eureka, in big letters with lots of white space. He gets the idea of using numbers and decimals to organize library books.
Mm.
So the placement of the words on the page, everything about it. That's why publishing houses have art directors. They don't just do the illustrations. They decide where to put the words, what kind of fonts to use, what size type to use, and so forth. One more, and then I'll maybe try to answer a couple of questions if there are any. I hope that the process sounded simple to you. It's not a difficult process to write appropriate language for each story. It's a long, complicated process. You cannot rush it. And this is a story around our way on Neighbor's Day. It's a story filled with multicultural people who live on a busy street. They all live in brownstones, so I'm guessing this is like New York. And it has a really good rhythm all the way through it. The book says, blue sky, no clouds, time to go. I know, I'll see them later. So I head home while they both stay to play around our way. I peek in the barbershop. Uncle Charlie and Grandpop are talking loud and arguing, debating with the men. And the whole book has this sort of this rhythm that makes you want to dance or snap your fingers or something to carry the idea of the kind of evenings they have and the fun they have in her neighborhood. So, and it brings in cultural elements from all the different families, foods they bring to the get together and dance steps that they use and so forth. Okay. Anybody have any suggestions of books that you love that use some of these devices or maybe use them really well? The point is not to use them, it's to use them well. Sluggy Slug. Oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Who's the author? I can't see that small. You're muted, Brandy.
Chris Rashka, Raschka. It's part of a little series. There is also Wormy Worm and Whaley Whale and Moosey Moose. And the series is called Thingy Things. And they're short, they're cute, but then, I mean, they're really short, but they just work and they're fun.
Did you ever make a dessert that looked so incredible? And everybody says, oh my goodness, you must have spent hours in the kitchen. And you go, 10 minutes, it was so easy to make. But sorry.
You're all right.
Questions?
I don't think we had any questions. You did such a great job explaining prosody and all the different elements, which I just love this. I mean, I just love the idea of choosing the right words and love what you said, that every word and even every punctuation has to earn its place. And with a children's book, that's so true. With a full-length novel, you can get by with some lack of that, but you
Right,
cannot, the shorter the piece, the more it's noticeable and the more impact it has, right?
right. But I was reading, I read Orphan Song by Julia Gilliam Adams. Oh my word. I was so wrapped up in her beautiful language. The story was heartbreaking, but the language that she closed that story in, and I bought the next two books in the series and read all three of them right in a row. Just
Oh,
beautiful use of language in the right place at the right time.
it
So
is
that
wonderful.
story still is in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what you said, like about emotion and intellect. And, we do tend to remember those things that have an emotional impact on us much longer and much deeper.
It's well known that emotion is a key to
Mhm.
our intellect.
Yeah.
That even God's word says that when you apply yourself, when you're absorbed in something, you will learn it.
Mhm.
It will become part of you. And that's the point. Not every book should be sappy. Not every
No,
book
of
should
course
be,
not.
a
Mhm.
romance. Sorry, I don't like to read romance. But,
That's
um,
okay.
but now give me a good fantasy with a bunch of swords and monsters from outer space and all this stuff. I'm there, man. But it's just what we're trying to do is not just write words
Yeah.
or write stories. We want stories, whether our stories directly talk about Jesus and God's love, or whether our stories are filled with reminders, what I call subtle reminders of God's story for us. or whether they are just cute and clever, fun books for children to read. We still want those stories to find a little hidey hole in their children's hearts.
Yeah. No, this was fantastic. Everyone's invited to come on. We'll have a few more minutes, and if you have something that you would like to say, you can say that, or a question you want to ask, or a book to
Excuse me.
recommend. I said Chicka Chicka Boom Boom, which is an old book, but I mean, I loved that book. I think
Click clack type. What? Click clack moo. How's that type?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that one? Yep. Yep.
they're just that with that rhythm, and yeah, they're just so cute. And then I lost it. I had it and then I lost it. Debbie put a poem by Maya Angelou called Insomniac, which plays with the poetic form and does different things that can be really playful and fun to read. E. Cummings was one of my favorite poems when I was taking English classes at college, or one of my favorite poets when I was taking English classes in college, because he was famous for not using capital letters and for doing all kinds of different things with his, again, the way it looked on the page was very important to him, how the poem looked. So fun little trivia fact, I wrote a paper about him called oh my gosh, I won't even say it right. It's been so long because that's one word put into another word, but like the spont typographical naivety of E. Cummings. So and I won, and it was printed in a book that the university put out. So woohoo, one of my first publishing credits from way long ago. So anyway, anybody else want to come on and say something or add to the conversation?
I have while people are coming on, I have a thought. What would you say to people that when they write, they kind of come at like rhythm a little bit backwards? Sometimes I do this. I will have a a pattern and an emphasis in my head, a rhythm in my head, and then I put words on the page, and to me it sounds right, but then others come along and read it and it sounds wrong. And I have kind of the same trouble when I read other people's writing, their poetry, that they have a certain rhythm, and because I emphasize words a little differently sometimes, I can't get the rhythm that they intended, so it just sounds like a mess to me. Do you have any tips for us as writers, and we're trying to write, to maybe avoid some of those errors in trying to fit words to a rhythm and instead allowing the words dictate the rhythm?
Well, 3 tips. One is first write the story without any kind of poetry. Number 2 is remember, even in America, in the United States, around different parts of the country, we pronounce words differently. So you want to try to avoid as many of those words as you can, especially if they are at the end of a rhyming book, at the end of the sentence, trying to, like all of my grandparents said, arn your shirt and hang it on the line. Arn your shirt and hang it on the line. Well, it's very hard to rhyme with any of those. So you want to avoid as many of those as you can. And the other tip that someone shared with me just a couple of years ago, which has helped me a lot, when you are analyzing your poetry that you write or your picture book that you write, don't mark stressed and unstressed syllables. Mark only stressed syllables. And then read, and then just kind of read over the unstressed syllables. And so you get a better feel of how most people are going to read it.
That's a good tip. Thank you.
And a lot of lines begin with an unstressed syllable, like with the word the. And then you only count if you have 5 stressed syllables. The line could actually have 7 or it could have 10 or 11 or 12 syllables, but you only count the stressed ones.
That makes a lot of sense.
Can I say something, Jean?
Whoever said that, yes.
Um,
Debbie, hey.
I pulled this off my bookshelf here. I'll do the video if I may.
Yes, please, please come on.
So this is the
My
little,
little train.
yeah, My Little Train by Satomi Ichikawa, which you said perfectly, Johnny, as far as I know, Jeffrey. So what's interesting about the variations of rhyme in this, which might speak a little to Brandy's question, is he does not confine himself to a rhythm. He does much more with onomatopoeia, pauses, punctuation, but he does have rhyme in there. It's just not the prevailing vehicle of sound that is being used. And so at some time he's got the internal rhyme in like this, the last of the 3 lines in this book is last stop mountaintop. So it's very quick, the words rhyming together. In other places he uses full end rhyme. It's a lot of it is woo woo and little kangaroo. So it's telling a movement story. It's like the journey of the little engine, this train picking up characters, animal characters, stuffed animals or toys along the way and taking them. And honestly, I didn't even notice in the pictures and until I had gotten through a lot of the story that this all takes place in a house, and you see like the living room furniture and the pillows and everything. So that makes it even more fun to think of how a child could enact this at home. There's Anyway, what my point to Brandy was, maybe play with where you're putting the rhyming sounds, and if it may not work as a consistent rhyme scheme in rhythm, like every Who down in Whoville like Christmas a lot, but the Grinch who lived just north of Whoville did not. But if you can vary it, if that works in the story you're telling, to vary your rhythm and your line lengths to accommodate the rhyming words you think are the most important, that might work after, as Jean said, you've written the story content.
Yeah. And, I think that as picture book writers, especially, and board book writers, we get so accustomed to the da, 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 da. We think they all need to sound like that. No, children like poetry, like a variety of poetry. Like they like, again, rhythm is important, but it doesn't have to be rhythmic. Does that make sense? You don't have to actually feel the da 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 da. So
it's really more effective when you break it with the punctuation, the pauses, the suddenly shorter line length, or whatever it might be. And there are so many different ways to do it.
That kind of reminds me of the kids thing. Well, I don't know where it came from. We've had some discussion elsewhere about this, but Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair. Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't fuzzy, was he?
yeah,
Always my favorite kids one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Do you remember Teddy Bear climbed the stairs? Or am I too old? Is the rest of you, does anybody else remember that?
Yeah.
And that sing-song beat is important for children. They're learning with 4, 5, 6-year-olds. Have you ever tried to have first graders keep rhythm with a song? Oh my word, it's hilarious. But they're learning rhythm, and that sing-song helps them. But I think we can expand and do more, like Debbie says, throw something a little unusual in there.
Singing is a way to try to test out your word rhythms too. You may not be writing a song, but can you sing it? Does it work? I'm helping my grandchildren learn songs for a little children's drama camp, because they do original productions every summer. And so this one is, they've kind of rewritten the story of the little engine that could, and they're calling it the tiny train that could, or something, but they've changed the dialogue and they've changed the characters somewhat, and yet it's recognizably based on that classic little golden book. And so they're having, these kids are 7 and 9. Well, almost 10. Wait, yeah. And they're it's got things like a lot of the devices that Jean mentioned, repetition, refrain, punctuation. So it's got things like listen, listen, little children, listen while I sing you a wait, listen so you won't sing a sad refrain, work while it is day, ever watch and pray, give the strength of your youth today. And you can hear the rhyme, you can hear the rhythms, you can hear the pauses, and that it just really works. And those elements help the kids learn it very quickly. They learn the words faster than I did, obviously. And, but so many elements of everything Jean talked about are in these song lyrics and the way the music is written. So, and you talked about at the very beginning, musicality, that the musicality of language, that's what we're talking about. So even if we're not writing a melody or a song, can it work in that way? Sandra Boynton is not one of my favorite authors, but my grandchildren love those books, and they are wacky. They're Jean's version of the fun ones rather than the very serious content ones. I don't know, Dinosaur Dance, is that one of them?
Yeah.
Just crazy things to look at. And can we incorporate even some of those into certain stories, maybe not the most serious ones? So just there's so much variety out there. I almost never read a children's book unless I hate it, that I don't really take some lessons from. And I suppose I take some negative, like don't do this, from the ones I hate.
Anybody else want to recommend a book that's just an excellent example? And that is how we get the feel for how this is how we know what I want my sentences to sound like. Because I've listened, like the book, the first thing I read you was Firefly Mountain. I love her books. And as soon as I read her book, I thought, that's what I want my books to sound like. I knew immediately. And so then, of course, you have to learn how to do that. But,
yeah. Well, and you have to read, like if you're going to write picture books, you need to know the top ones and you need to be reading them. Just go to the library and just sit there and pull them out. Yeah.
Pull up a table and chair and just read and read and read.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. We're going to go ahead and close the recording. So glad for everybody being here. Jean, thank you for your presentation. It was so wonderful and so terrific to talk about all these different elements of writing putting prosody music into our words. I love that. Next week, we're going to have a writer's journey episode with Ben Cooper. So he will be here. Ben is, he writes devotionals and he's a beekeeper and he writes about bees. And so we're really excited to have him come and just share the journey that he has had. We do this to show, we've had like, I don't know, 3 or 4 so far, just to show that nobody's writing journey is like anybody else's. Everybody has something different, a different story. And so many of the times what we think we're going to do, what we think the writing God has called us to do, he pulls a little switcheroo on us at some point during that journey. We end up, not everybody, but a lot of us, and does something else. So it's just really fun to see how people start out one way and they might end up doing something very different. I don't know if that's Ben's story or not. I'm anxious to hear him talk about it. If you're watching the replay, we're so glad that you are watching it, but we do invite you to join us any Tuesday morning, 11 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Central, around the globe. Find your time zone and be here for the live episode as we record. So you can ask questions and also join us for our after party. So we are going to turn off the recording, but everybody is invited to stick around and for a more informal discussion. And that's always a lot of fun. So until next week, bye everybody and happy writing.